Thanks for listening to Psyche Design. My name is Megan Lavoda, and today in this episode, we're going to be exploring introversion and extroversion, the two orientations of the psyche on a deeper level. Now, I had a guest on this episode with me, Nate Rasa, an ENFP. Our conversation is actually going to be split up into two episodes, and this episode is going to be just about the judging functions, feeling and thinking, or as I like to call the creative functions. These two functions are how we assess the world around us and ultimately how our mind is creating reality. I personally think that the best way to understand the 8 cognitive functions is to really get what introversion and extroversion is, and then to be able to apply that to the 4 main functions of the psyche: feeling, thinking, sensing, and intuiting. Because basically what you do is you're able to look at these 4 sections of the psyche through either lens, either the introverted or the extroverted lens. Introversion and extroversion have different directions in how the energy is flowing. Introversion seeks the universal from the personal perspective, and extroversion seeks what's personal from the universal perspective. They have 2 completely different ways of looking at things, and so whenever you are wanting to understand introverted feeling versus extroverted feeling, for example, it helps in order to define them and to really get at what the essence of these things are. It helps to look at them through the lens of each of these 2 orientations. So that's what I'm going to do in this conversation with Nate. I really hope that you enjoyed this conversation. I know that Nate and I had a lot of fun recording it, and I even learned something new as well, because if you didn't know, Nate as an ENFP and I as an ENFJ have different cognitive functions, and so we were able to kind of explore the dynamics between each of the functions that are coming from the opposite orientation. So FI and FE, and then also TE and TI, and we will get into the perceiving functions in next week's episode. And if you want to know more about introversion and extroversion in general, I did just film a episode on that came out last week. Thank you for listening, and let's get on with the episode. Hello, and thank you for listening to this episode of Psyche Design. Today, I'm here with Nate Rasa, an ENFP from the Type community. You may recognize him from YouTube, from Twitter, from Spotify, iTunes, Amazon podcasts, right? Everywhere, right?
Just everywhere. Yeah. I try to put myself in everything to be as annoying as I possibly can.
Yeah.
But, well, generally, yes, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. Wherever you get your podcasts, which he could talk about that in a second. But basically, we are gathered here today because we're going to be talking about the dynamics of introversion and extroversion. You might have already heard my episode in which I talk about introversion and extroversion and kind of what that is as the 2 orientations of personality. And we're going to be diving a bit deeper into that today. And we're also going to be whenever I was learning the 8 cognitive functions, I found that the easiest way to really understand what the 8 functions are isn't to look at them each by the definitions and the keyword, but you really have to understand introversion and extroversion, in my opinion, because then you can just apply it to each of the functions. And if you don't really understand introversion and extroversion in a Jungian sense, then you don't really understand the true nature of like FI and FE, for example, because I think people can kind of forget like some of the elements of, for example, extroversion being related to the external objects and not so much the subject of the person. So, for example, extroverted feeling is not so much concerned with the subject. It might be subjective seeming, depending on how you're defining the word subjective. It might seem that way because we're talking about feelings and not logic, but it's still very much removed from the subject. So we're going to go deeper into the ideas of introversion and extroversion. So because these 2 orientations are basically ways that the energy in your psyche can behave. And they kind of have this symbiotic relationship where extroversion draws out introversion and introversion draws in extroversion. So we're going to go down the list of the functions and kind of give some examples. And luckily, Nate is an ENFP and I am an ENFJ. And even though those are three of the same letters, we actually have completely different cognitive functions in our psyche. So we kind of have one person to be able to vouch for, our ego having one of the functions in our ego stack. So, actually, I kind of just jumped ahead to what we're talking about, but Nate, would you like to introduce yourself?
I love how well. All right, I can introduce. I want to give it a little quick because I am also really excited to
Yeah.
dive into the meteor concept of what we're going to talk about today. So, just as Megan has said earlier, you probably would have already seen me around. I'm not as prominent, I would say, trying to put myself out there ever since I've been more focused on my particular angle on typology, which is communication and seeing type from a more language perspective, imagining it as or visualizing it as if it were different types equal different cultures and experiencing the opposite function via from conversation or just being around them can be almost akin to a culture shock if you were to make it that comparison in culture,
Yes.
right?
I love that.
And so in a way it does help because at least from how I understood it, at least when I made that connection, was that it allowed me to give space or allow that there is space for people to be different and to celebrate the differences that everybody had. So that would be where I'm coming from, which is why it was actually very interesting to be invited to talk about introversion versus extroversion, especially since we both have very, very opposite
Mhm.
uh opposite cognitive functions when it comes
Mhm.
to looking at the world. Although being both extroverted, which is also going to be really funny to
Yeah.
play that card into that.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll see how. I'm excited to see how it goes. What was one of the first functions you had in mind that we were gonna dabble into?
So actually, before I even get to that, do you want to talk a little bit about um like your how you got into typology and like where people can find you?
Oh yeah, sorry.
That was
I
kind of an
don't.
NE moment and
True, that was a bit of a bloop.
not mentioning the SE of where
I
who
know.
you
I was like,
really
what?
are.
Yeah, so where to find me? Primarily right now, I've been less active in a lot of social media, except for Twitter, which is something
Mhm.
I've been more of a. I revamped my Twitter account. That's Kiddo Rasa for anyone who might be interested, where I really just it's very free babble, and I do get serious on type every now and then. Like I like to
Mhm.
make comments and engage with people there. Uh, you will find me on Megan's Facebook group as a moderator as well, which is also interesting and very fun. And also on my YouTube channel, as she mentioned earlier. Right now, my YouTube channel is a bit of a delayed experience because I'm not as active as I would say as I did before. However, I've been starting a series there called the Personal Musings, where I really just try to highlight and explain in depth my take and understanding and beliefs when it came to type. Your original question of how I got into type, I think we have a video on that up already,
Yeah.
right? We
Yeah.
did actually have.
So I can link
Yeah,
that
you'll
somewhere.
find the collaboration between me and Megan many moons ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I also wanted to mention that what you said about culture shock, I think, was a really, really good analogy. And kind of when we go through feeling, thinking, sensing, and intuition, each of the functions, like the two orientations, can kind of act like a culture shock with each other whenever they interact. And so that interaction is really interesting. But I also had the thought of you coming from like an immigrant family in Canada. I wonder if not to speak for you. I'm curious if you could speak on this because I think it would be really interesting. Do you think that that has added to your experience of like kind of being in two different cultures in one, do you think that that influences how you see type? And
First I didn't think it would have applied. Actually, it's funny that this was my idea of type being a language format was actually pretty recent. But you're right, it is something that lent itself to my experience and why I look at type the way it is. I am, my parents were immigrants, and I mean we're citizens now, but I growing up, it definitely was an experience of trying to figure out like my identity. Was something that was a bit of an oddball situation because my parents really wanted to instill really strong Filipino values and Filipino um kind of a background into that, like in how I was raised, how I should view respect, how I should look at love and family. Like it was very like in that direction. However, of course, if you're growing up in a Western society, some of those things don't always coincide. It's really known amongst the communities where we would compare Western culture with Eastern culture or South Asian culture, which is very hospitable, whereas in Western culture, it's not as much so. Sometimes there's a bluntness that isn't, that it kind of comes off very different for Filipinos. And adding to that as well, being bilingual, there's also that
Mhm.
added pressure too of, well, I know this language, but it doesn't, there's words that don't always translate from one or the other. English has a lot of vocabulary for everything and borrowed
Mhm.
vocabulary for everything.
Mhm.
Whereas Tagalog doesn't always have, 20 words for one thing.
Mhm.
Sometimes, even though there's also going to be another component, like Tagalog also has a lot of words for emotional nuance that
Mm.
English doesn't always have. So
Mm.
there's a big difference, because culture often dictates how a language is used, right? And how it's enjoyed by the people who use it. So getting to learn a language often became almost being invited to join a community, to be joined into this nation almost by learning their language. So it's really interesting. And so making that connection, that leap into type, realizing that we could actually do the same thing, and then to be appreciative of someone else's kind of culture. Let's say they were
Yeah,
anti-dom or something, right?
because I feel like the way that if you were to be in a different culture or be of two cultures, you kind of have to hold space for both realities in one in order to exist peacefully. I think that the same is true if you are talking about talking to another person with a completely different type as you or whatever. And one of the reasons why I really enjoy talking with you about type is because you seem to really have that mindset when you're talking to everyone, where you seem to hold space. Like I would say you're good at holding space for FE and NI, even though you do not use it yourself. And something I really want to get across in this podcast, as I'll do lots of more episodes on, I'm sure, is how do you hold space without having to literally do it? Because the thing with type is that we, if you don't know how deep your cognitive wiring goes, or you don't know your type at all, we all tend to have this bias where we assume that everyone processes like us, whether you know you are or not. It goes really, really deep. And so if you're interacting with someone that has a different type code as you, you might assume that they're expecting you to kind of match what they're doing. So for you as an ENFP, if you are always coming to situations with, so your dominant function is extroverted intuition, if you're always drawing out all these possibilities, that can make someone feel overwhelmed if they don't have a strong NE. Maybe they feel like they have to match you and like throw as much ideas back at you.
Well, an interesting thing to
They don't
add
have to.
on. They
Mm-hmm.
don't have to, but I would say that growing up, I thought that what I was thinking around going off of what you said, I thought people just had any. I thought people wake up bombarded with ideas every morning. Like I thought this was normal. So imagine my surprise coming into school where people would look at you different because you could produce 50 pages of artwork of just ideas, rough draft sketches,
Mm-hmm.
and you're now being faced with people either labeling you a certain way or boxing you in a certain way because your mind is apparently different. And
Mm-hmm.
I would say that it was interesting growing up to have that kind of have that kind of thrown at you, or to have that swim through, really, that kind of situation. But going back to that point where we say that this is something of holding space for somebody who has a different
Yeah.
type as us, I told myself that, well, just because I might be so different with my mindset doesn't mean like I could switch that also for somebody else. Like a person would also have that similar experience, thinking that they themselves believe that they wake up every morning believing that their world is FE and they absorb all these things going on. But it's completely
Mm-hmm.
different from me. I can't relate to that. But in a way, we might be able to draw compromises. We might be able to draw connections with each
Yeah.
other based off of that shared like shock, that shared culture
Yeah.
shock almost.
It's
But
like a talk. And
yeah,
that's why I bring up holding space, because it's not about, and we'll talk about this more when we go into the each dynamic, but it's not about needing to change who you are. It's about recognizing that other people are different and letting
mhm,
them be different without changing.
yes. Well, might I say,
Mm-hmm.
I one of my biggest things that I practice now is stop demanding your dominant function from somebody who doesn't even value it.
Yes.
Because if
Yeah.
we expect other people to square up on us and match us based on what we believe is useful to us, that just opens the door to a lot of disappointment. And well, newsflash, life ain't that like life isn't that ideal. Like even this is coming from an idealist category, right? We're from
Yeah.
the box of the idealist people,
Yeah.
telling people that that's not realistic.
Yeah.
That means you
Yeah,
know
and it's
something's
because
off.
we know we've tried it and we've tried it and it doesn't work.
Oh yeah, we did the preachy side.
Yeah. And like just to kind of give another example, with my dominant function as extroverted feeling, I'm always just swimming in the world of everyone else's emotions. I take it at face value, that like even right now with the pandemic going on and like especially in America, a lot of political stress. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so overwhelmed. I'm feeling all of the fear collectively.
Mm,
Like even if I'm not trying to, even if I feel fine, I still am swimming in collective fear, and that's like a thing I have to deal with. But like not everybody values the extroverted emotional realm as much as me, and it's not fair for me to expect that from other people. But so that's just kind of an example. And so yeah, I also want to preface like with introversion and extroversion that um everybody has, introverted and extroverted sides to them. And when we go through these functions, try and identify, try and identify what your dominant function is, as well as what your auxiliary function is, which is your secondary supportive function. But also pay attention to all of the functions. I guess I just want to say that these are all a part of you, whether or not you are super conscious of it. Like these dynamics are happening between you and another person, but they're also happening within you. So just try and keep an open mind. Don't like skip to the part where your function is and then like turn it off. I mean, you could turn it off if you want, but I want you to just kind of keep an open mind that your psyche is full of all eight of these. It's all happening within you, but that your experience of how these clashes are happening is going to be dependent on your personality as well as the context. Like, what do you do for work? Like, who are the people in your life? Um, what functions are being demanded from you, from your environment, how you were raised, stuff like that.
well, might I add as well that
Uh
there
huh.
is also something to even just to keep in the back of everyone's mind. We're going to be using vocabulary that is more what we're used to when we talk to each other about it, because we've studied type. We've kind of moved away from MBTI,
Mm-hmm.
like the typical terms we might expect. We're actually more trying to uncover, unearth, completely destroy certain stereotypes that some people might already
Mm-hmm.
have in, if you have any of those things going on in your head while we say certain words, that's not our intention. We are trying to use the words as isolated and as different as we could be.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them could be having new definitions that we're trying to apply. Obviously, if there's any questions, we'd love to explain more.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that the previous episode that you had pretty much
Mm-hmm.
highlights what you really mean when you say certain things like objective and subjective, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, go. listen to my introversion and extroversion episode if you haven't already. But yeah, we're trying to get to the essence of these things. And this is also kind of a tangent, but I realized too that with both of us being feeling types, I think that the words that we use, I'm very sensitive to not wanting to choose a word that has like a negative connotation. And I think a lot of thinking types that write definitions, they might not think about how is this definition going to land in the
To a
person.
person, yeah, to another
And
person.
so I always try and find words that I think that the actual person who uses that is going to resonate with. That's like the way that I care about finding words.
I mean, mind
Um,
you, I'm the one that uses
yeah.
words with my own definition, so that's been something of my own issue to unpack, which I'm gonna
Yeah.
try to not do a lot today. If you don't understand anything I'm saying, please like let me know
Yeah.
because I'm used to my own language, which
Yeah.
knowing me with my FI is just kind of a mess of its own.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah. So, just to preface this too, introversion and extroversion, overall the dynamic, this was something that I recently kind of came up with a way of describing it. I told Nate this today, but introversion seeks the universal from the personal, and extroversion seeks the personal from the universal. And what I mean by that is that if you're looking at just a function in a vacuum, introverted functions are personal in nature, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing universal about them at all. It's like they're seeking the universal aspects and trying to then apply that to their personal view. So introverted intuition, for example, is often seen as a very universal, intuitive, like the concept. It's seen kind of as universal, but it's coming from it starts with the spark. It starts with that aha moment in the NI user, and then they seek that universal to bring to them. Whereas, okay, extroversion seeks the personal from the universal. Extroversion is looking at everything at face value and then trying to find what do I want to take from this? Or like, I don't know, how would you describe that?
actually, I like that you went with that because by
Mm-hmm.
saying that we pull the personal from the universal and taking it at face value, I can already feel that there's some people that might pop up and be like, but NE isn't direct and NE isn't taking things at face value because an NE DOM likely is going to create and generate ideas that has nothing to do with the object that we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about. So I would say, of obviously, when the words that we're using, it's not an absolute type of concept where we're like, no, they have to be that way as if it's so strict. It's just how language works. Like we use what comes off, what's functional, really, and it's a
Well, one
functional way of wording
one
it.
thing I'll say with that is that when we talk about taking something at face value, what are we taking at face value? And E doesn't take like physical reality at face value, and E takes ideas at face value. It's a possibility I might die in a minute right now. Like,
Yeah,
and E takes potential at face value, you
it's
know?
very and it's very in the moment too. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
would say to add as well, to add nuance to that, I wrote notes about it where I mentioned it was more of a conscious and awareness is part of this as well, because an any
Mm-hmm.
user is consciously making connections even if we're not always aware of it necessarily, but our mind constantly is just putting dots together. It's
Mm-hmm.
right. So we, for the folks, listening and trying to understand this, we really mean the personal from the universal because we are looking at ideas from our eyes as I mean, I can speak for myself as an extrovert. When I use that, I'm consciously looking at ideas the way I want it to be. Like I want whatever I'm interested in, whatever it is that
Mm-hmm.
catches my eye, whatever it is that's novel and new.
So
Like
would
it
you
fits.
say Would you say, as an extroverted, intuitive dominant, that one example of seeking the personal from the universal would be that you try out every idea until you feel your vision? Your vision is going to come, or like your life purpose, your life path, it's going to come from taking the possibilities that are there. Whereas introverted intuition might have this um, vision that they already know, and then they're going to try and see how they can make that universal. So like you like would you agree with that, as far as like you're going to take what you the universal, and then what is personal to you or subjective to you is then revealed. Where like for me with extroverted feeling, one example could be that I might be nice to everyone or connect with everyone or try and be open as like a standard. But then the people who stick around or like the people or the opportunities that, you know, I don't know, like the personal is revealed to me through like this very universalist way of
Yeah, like it all happens. The word that came up to me was within tactile situation, like it has to happen within real time, whereas I kind of view a lot of the subjective introverted sides or functions are more likely to just keep it to themselves until it's revealed to them, or until they
yes.
purposely manifest it out. For us, we're already just looking outside. We're not really, there's no inside going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because I would say
exactly.
with myself, it's really hard for me. I'm notorious for NE. We look into ideas almost to a point where we can't not ignore ideas. We have to keep looking, even if there's like a small percent of it, even if it's irrelevant, we'll still look into it because we don't want to miss out on what else we could be looking at as an idea or as a concept of this universe. We need to keep looking. So it's like you could call it a hunger, you can call it an obsession. It just, we have to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
And what you added with that second part of will we find the life path? Sometimes we don't, because that would take an introverted aspect to come to that decision, right? Like to
Mm-hmm.
come to that conclusion. And because if we're looking at it from a vacuum and as an isolated function of NE, there is no end. We
Yeah.
have to keep going. And
But
so it's
from the
kind of,
personal or from like the person's perspective, you
yeah,
might have your introverted sensing that comes up that it's like, oh, these are the things that I've tried. I know that it works for me. So I'm going to
once it connects with that
continue.
other side, yeah. But
Mm-hmm.
usually how it is, it's we're we're cursed to be trapped in. I mean, that's where the whole choice paralysis happens.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's a phenomenon in psychology, but I would say that for those in type, those who are any users typically can all relate
Mm-hmm.
to a problem when it comes to making decisions, especially if you're a younger NP having a hard
Mm-hmm.
time being, oh, whoa, I have so many options and I can't stop making more options. Like, why can't I stop? It becomes one of those things, let's say,
Yeah.
quirks that
Okay.
we have to get out of as we
Mm-hmm.
get older. But yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So I think I want to start with the judging functions, or as also call the creative functions. And I like to think of them as creative functions because both feeling and thinking it's assessing reality by kind of putting a stamp on it uh, with a judgment, with this is what I've decided, either from the feeling or thinking. And let's just go in and start with feeling. As feelers, we've got introverted feeling or FE, and we have um wait, what did I just say?
Or FI.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Introverted feeling or FI, and then we have extroverted feeling or FE. There we go. And so when we're looking at feeling, we're looking at assessing reality with ethics and values. And then the extroverted side of that is going to be assessing the outer universe um, of ethics and values. And they're going to be looking at it in a more absolutist way, and looking at it in a broad way. Whereas introverted feeling is looking at the inner universe of ethics and values. It is more receptive. These are other keywords I want to talk about is receptive versus activating. So introverted feeling is very receptive. It's like, how do all of these emotions outside of me impact me in my universe emotionally? And then extroverted feeling is going to be um, it, I guess, how would you like, I'm too close to, it hits too close to home for me. Would you say that FE activate, how would you say that it activates?
Well, I would say that there is a level of keen understanding that FE people have, and I'm gonna refer to FE people as high stack FE, like
Yeah,
those
that's a
with
good.
dominant auxiliary, right? Who are just naturally attuned to trying to just noticing other people's feelings, And this could come up in, oh, tone of voice, like they'll just pick up on these little patterns, especially tone of voice. Tone of voice is like a famous one, I would say. Famous in the way that I personally heard it from a lot of people I've known who are FE.
But you know what's really funny is that I don't ever consciously think, what is their tone of voice?
Yeah.
Like, I just react to it. I just notice it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I mean, I get it from the people who text me. They're like, why'd they talk like that? They said it in this way. And I'm going,
Oh,
really? That
yeah.
makes a difference? Like, if they said it in a different way,
Ooh.
would I have changed it? I would say it's activatey because there's often, as an FI user, in my often,
You create a
there
mood
is,
in a room.
yeah, there's an injection. I personally feel
Mm.
it as an FI user walking to a room, and if there's an FE person in the room, I feel an injection of some kind of, and this could be taken weirdly, but it's a kind of expectation almost.
Mm.
It's like a pressure in a way, and pressure in the sense that as me, the person, the FI coming in, feeling as if I need to match that energy, but then also feeling completely incompetent in knowing what exactly to match. Because it
Mm.
seems for FE folks such as yourself, it's very easy and comfortable, and that it's not weird for you. But then for us, if we ever
Yeah.
try to copy that, to kind of be like, oh, hey, I'm going to match your energy, to us it comes off inauthentic and it comes off strange, like as if we're alien walking in a different planet.
And I think the reason why it can come off inauthentic is because we aren't responding, we aren't really revealing what our inner universe of emotions is saying. We kind
Yeah,
of are just not paying attention to it. Do you want to just sort of say in your own words what you think FE and FI, like what the reaction between those two functions is like?
you mean like how they interact with each
Yeah,
other, or like
yeah.
just how they typically, because I usually understood being friends with an FE dom, not you, somebody else.
Yeah.
But you do. It's just over the years I've learned that there were certain word choices that is very common in FE folks, and then there were very word choices that I would say as an FI person would choose. There's also reasonings and excuses that can be misperceived by both sides. Like I would
Mhm.
say certain I'm trying to think of what example we use. We had a conversation about this before. If
Mhm.
two people were talking about a scheduling, for example, some folks or one of us will might not deliberately will might omit certain details because to us it feels obvious, but because we are of opposite functions it's not obvious for the other person. So if they don't receive that information, it could be taken completely differently and make a wrong conclusion despite being both on the
Mhm.
same page. Very funny.
Yeah. Yeah. And with extroverted feeling, being extroverted, it tends to rely on wanting to communicate what is going on in the emotional realm. That's how it processes its feelings. Where introverted feeling will process by going inside more. I guess the way I would describe it, because I want to describe it generally of how they interact, but then I also want for each of these to sort of step into the role of that function and then describe how the other function makes you feel, if that makes sense. So even for the functions we don't use as much,
True, true.
like,
I would actually quickly add to
mhm.
there's also that aspect of responsibility that I think we could touch on as well.
Oh,
Because
what do you mean?
remember in extroverted functions, especially from our experience, there's also this feeling of feeling as if you are
Oh, yeah.
responsible
Oh,
for certain things.
definitely.
This may not always work for myself as an NEDOM. I don't know if other NEDOMs can feel this way or relate, but please do tell me if you do. But I personally feel I'm gonna use the word responsible for all the possibilities that come to
Yeah.
my eyes. Like I have to look at it. I can't not look at it. I need to notice all of it. And
Mhm.
taking that over that principle to FE, do you think that you kind of feel responsible
Oh,
for in
absolutely.
the room, like if somebody is sad, if somebody is not, well, let's say not even an emotional thing. Let's say when it comes to making decisions as a group, it's almost as if do you feel responsible to be something for those for everybody at once?
Absolutely. I do it. I do it like so automatically that I don't even like if I, especially like now that I live with my partner, it's not just my emotions that influence my decisions. It very much is ours. And some of that like is just so natural to me that it's not a problem, and some of it kind of is a problem in the sense of that, like if my partner is saying like, oh, I have like an intense deadline at work, like I'm really stressed, then like even if they wouldn't tell me I couldn't, I might like, I'm not going to watch TV because I know that if I did, then they would get distracted and want to talk about it with me, and then they would be mad the next day. And so
Mm.
I'm not even going to do that because I know that how this is going to influence them. And I don't want to, and see, it's not always that kind. I mean, like, not that it's not kind, but also it's like I don't want to hear them bitch in the morning. It's like I don't want to deal with the emotions that might be there later. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
you're just saving
Like,
yourself, right? Saving yourself the
it's
trouble.
like I know how to navigate the world of all of those emotions. I know whenever someone's a ticking time bomb. I know whenever when someone's in a really good mood, I want to soak it up. I want to like, you know, I want to like ride those waves of how people are doing and like navigate
That's
my life.
actually that's perfect that you mentioned that you're comfortable, you're confident in that realm, because I would say
Yeah.
that the most immediate example to compare this to my NE is whenever people talk about so absolutist type of statements, my instant go-to was, have you considered? You know, right? Like you see any people constantly coming
Yeah.
up with, did you check all the possibility? What about this? What if this? What if
Yeah.
that? Because for us, we are we are cursed. I mean,
Mm.
I say this as an NE dom. I can't help but think that like
We're all cursed.
worry for others almost. Maybe worry isn't a word that all of us NPs can relate to. But please look into what the word means versus how the emotion that I, because I don't actually feel
Yeah.
worried. But it seems like I worry for the folks who make statements and then forget, or it comes off as if they might have forgotten to consider everything.
Mm.
And it's been my experience too that there's a lot of times where, because nobody looked it up more, they didn't go and do the whole research as expansive as, let's say, we did as an NE people, that we're always like, are you sure you looked at all the alternatives? Like, why did you pick that one? Like, there's
Mm.
way more. And I think that's the best thing I could think of. It doesn't mean that one's better or the other at all, but it just, as a comparison of that feeling responsible kind of example of, it's almost as if it's behavioral at this point, even though of course type
Mm-hmm.
isn't behavioral in any way, but it comes off and looks like that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, so I guess if I were to just describe on the surface the way that FI and FE interact is that um, FE wants to be on the same page and create like mutual benefit between the two people. And that requires emotional energy that FI might not have. Um, and so, from the FE perspective, it could look like FI is not putting in enough effort either to the relationship, or they aren't putting in enough effort to belong in a group, or maybe they just aren't being considerate enough of how they impact others. So that's kind of how it could seem. But then from the FI perspective, it might seem like FE is not being fully honest with themselves about what their intentions are emotionally and what they want to gain from things. FE can seem like they're always walking on eggshells and always tiptoeing around things, and not really knowing how to meet their own needs, and instead ignoring their needs and trying to just keep the peace so that they can avoid whatever's going on inside.
well, that and FI believes that each person is responsible for their own values
Yes, I think
in a way.
responsible is just a really, really good word
it,
for
it,
like
it seems like a good
what
word
all of the
today.
functions are.
We're gonna well we
Yeah.
in the context of subjective
It'd be a
introversion,
good.
the word responsible now is translated as person who owns up to what it is
Yeah.
they're going through, because
Yeah.
right in the external realm, an FE person feels responsible for everybody, but then as an FI person, I often look at that with skepticism and say, well, what about you? Did you check yourself yet? Is like the first go-to
Oh.
question.
Well, okay. So actually, framing it with responsible, that's such a great way to talk about it because it's making me want to clarify that FE is not necessarily responsible for everybody else's internal feelings, but I am responsible for making sure that I'm not going to be throwing my shit on anyone else. I know that I'm not going to be making your day worse. Like my hands are clean. That's kind of how FE is. And I think that especially from an FI person, it could be interpreted as me trying to literally unpack the trauma of everyone around me, which is really not true. Like like FE does not go that deep.
Well, I think and we did talk about this in a previous conversation. The thing that as an FI person, we make the mistake of seeking that same energy from you, whereas really we
Yeah.
should be more happy or satisfied with the fact that this person can actually handle the supposed pressure of what FE can do because they are equipped with another function, TI. And
Yeah.
often if we kind of deliberately neglect or ignore that a person has TI, that this is why they're comfortable the way that they are, and that the supposed stress of looking at like us judging you guys for being the way that you are, we're like, why would you do it that way? Well, they wouldn't have to do it any other way because they're equipped with something else that can handle it. Like how for us, like I would say for myself, I can handle it because there's TE. I'm just gonna quickly think of an optimal, efficient route the way that I think makes sense because
Yeah.
because I'm confident in that sense. Even though the problem with me though is if I didn't share my FI, if I didn't express it,
Yeah.
people might assume that I'm just doing this out of right, like out of just a selfish need or out of this
You know,
whatever it is my narrative.
it just made me realize my mom is an ESFJ, so she also has the top function of extroverted feeling. And she always told me, don't burn any bridges. And I think that
Mm.
that's a really good example of FE feeling responsible for what they are putting out. Like I don't want to make the mood of the room worse. I don't want to um make it harder for the other person in my life to get their shit done. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't mean that I'm going like so even like with my partner, for example, um, I don't feel responsible for helping her sort through her childhood trauma. I'm there for her, but I don't feel that responsible. I feel
Mm-hmm.
responsible for making sure that I don't want to be the reason why she doesn't isn't able to focus on work because I left shit everywhere and I was being loud. You know what I mean?
Oh,
I'm
absolutely.
considerate. I'm considerate of the way that I'm impacting other people's ability to do their lives. And FE is on the same axis as introverted thinking, which is very focused on personal freedom. So I this is a connection there where like I don't ever want to be the reason why someone else can't enact their personal freedom to do what they want to do.
Which is I'm gonna counter that with the
Mhm.
word use of considerate, being considerate or consideration.
Yeah.
Because I would say from a TE perspective, there is a side of us that is considerate. I would plan for somebody. I would do their work for them. I would schedule for them. I would organize something for them. Because to me, I don't want to be responsible for why they're messed up or why they may have fallen if I could have at least helped them make life easier in some way. And easy in the sense that it is something that has somehow given that the idea of work smarter not harder. That's something
Hmm.
that's really like big on me. Like we don't always have to push ourselves so hard if it means that you could have done something better if you just put some thought into it. But then, right, like you could see how
Yeah.
it could counter in a weird way because a TE person showing consideration, being considerate, is through that avenue, which isn't in the FE realm, like what
Yeah.
you would be used to, maybe. Like it's like what personal freedom though, and then it just looks like we're trying
Yeah.
to order people around.
Yeah. And so that's we'll get to TI and TE in just a second, but that's a good example of how TI can feel like TE is trying to get rid of its personal freedom by telling it what to do, and FI can also feel like FE is telling it what to do. But
Hmm.
they're both they're responsible for completely different realms, and it seems like introverted feeling, the idea is that if I'm responsible for my own baggage and my own the inner universe of my feelings, then that's gonna prevent me from throwing my shit on anyone else and making their lives worse,
Well, I
right?
think a big part that could affect the FE person in this way is usually an option that we as an FI person would use is withdraw. We would like to take a moment if we feel that we're emotionally compromised because we believe that it's my responsibility. It's my job to take care of my feelings. So I would be like, sorry, I'm not feeling well right now. I need to take time for myself because I need to work on that. But then it could come off completely different to your ears because what end up happening in reality is somebody literally exiting, right, your room or your life or something, and it just comes off odd. Like now you have an empty space, and then you start asking yourself, did I do
That
something wrong? Did I say something wrong?
that's a really
Was
good
I
example.
right? Was I responsible for you withdrawing? Whereas really the truth is, no, you weren't. It was just that I believe that this distance is required for me to come back to you feeling better, coming back to because I want to provide you with my best self.
So to
Not
translate this, your FI feels very responsible for making sure that you're working through your baggage. And
yeah,
so you also feel responsible for, with the extroverted thinking, to set the boundary and make sure that that literally is going to happen by like making a plan for that to happen and then telling the other person. But what you might not have considered is, what does the other person expect from me? What has been our relationship like? Is it going to completely freak them out and trigger their anxieties if I leave without more of an explanation?
without a warning,
You know?
without even a goodbye.
So it's not that FE thinks that you can't do that. It's it's like if you were more considerate of the relationship of both people, then maybe you would say, um, hey, it's not you, like, oh, let's talk on Monday, or
Yes,
like just
it's
kind of,
not you, right? Just go back to that. It's
yeah,
not about you. It's like, and then reaffirm that with maybe an FE statement like, "I love you." Like, let's, right? Like, let's go back to this. You're not at fault.
yeah. And it's like, if your FE is like, are you in tune with the other person? So like, for example, like, this is just something that came to mind, like, um the rules are different based on the people you're talking about. Rules are always different for FE. There is, because it's like, for example, I message you about type quite a bit. I don't ever say to you, um, sorry I didn't get back to this, or hold on, like I need to do this, because the realm is, you don't care,
Hmm.
right? There are other people that I talk to that might care,
Oh,
or we don't have the
this.
relationship. You know what I mean?
My friend is, and I've had this long conversation with her, and it was something of some that we really needed to unpack because for her, and this is my ESFJ friend, she's very, if you don't talk to me, I'm going to assume that the empty space means that you've abandoned me. Not in the same extremity intensity,
And
but
I
in
have felt
the
that way
word,
many
right? In
times.
the word of just being left alone means that what did you do? And so a lot of the times it's a measure of a conversation really of being able to express yourself as an FI person to be, this is nothing to do with you. It's just I need some space. It has, but the thing is what she doesn't realize is my feelings for people do not change. They do not alter. They do not, just because distance happened, just because time had like moved by. What I feel for a person, if I've decided that that's how I feel about them, I'm feeling that 3 years from now. That's not going to change,
Mm-hmm.
unless there is something very big, like maybe if you died. If we're gonna go for the intensity,
Yeah.
maybe the feelings might shift at some point.
Yeah.
But often that doesn't shift because my inner world is often, I would tell my friends this, like, I think about you guys often. I go about my day, I have you guys in my head, like in my personal universe,
Yeah.
right, being alive and well, so I don't feel like I need to believe that somebody's wrong or somebody hates me or something, right, like because it doesn't make sense for
Yeah.
me.
And I think that for FE, it's trying to build the culture of comfort to where, like each FE is very aware of the different cultures, um
Anyway, yeah, like
or
it's.
norms,
Mhm.
to where I guess I just want to say that depending on who I'm talking to, I might feel a need to preface things, but I'm always like very attuned to what the other person is like expecting, and also what the mood is,
Oh
you
yeah,
know?
I mean, to move past my FI little schism moment, um in an FE way, no, bringing up my friend again as an example, like she understands the concept of closeness in such a different angle than I do. But she's also very private as a person too, which is something that I would say that even for ESFJ might come off really strange. But she's incredibly private about certain facts about her life because she's not just going to share, and she's not going to express her feelings to just about everybody. Because only the right people who can take that side of her she'll be open to, right? Because she's more responsible for, I mean, if someone's crying beside her, she's not going to be, oh, let me just, do that too. And she'll be like, I don't even know you. Like, how can I even bring up this, trauma of mine if I didn't even establish some kind of evidential, I mean, I'm using TE words, but if we didn't establish anything in the real world, how can we even say that there was a bridge, that there was a connection? Because I guess in FE terms, there wouldn't be. You'd have to make one first.
Yeah. So like, even when you were giving that as an example, I think that more trust is what would change that.
And trust is like a rare commodity today.
Like, I would even say that like maybe an FI user in your situation might be thinking, why don't they just understand that that's just how I am? But FE would say, well, to me, that seems like there needs to be more trust and understanding, or like a communication in the relationship so that they know where you stand. / maybe it's even your friend, or like maybe it's the FE person with like a fear of abandonment that they need to unpack, and it has nothing to do with trust, or like maybe they have a hard time trusting you and it has nothing to do with you. But like either way, if there is like an issue like that in the relationship, it tells me that there is some sort of trust that needs to be there. Like, because like I've even started telling my friends just straight up like, hey, by the way, like it's easier for me to just tweet random things throughout the day, but I might not be able to give my full attention until later. Like I've been like trying to say things like that. Like I think I try and teach people of like the culture of dealing with me so that there's some sort of comfort there. So that's I don't know, like if that's like kind of related, but like
no, it absolutely makes sense to me.
Explain. Yeah.
Yeah, it's it's funny because how we go about coming to those conclusions often are very different, but the conclusion's the same. I would say, comparing you to my friend in this context, she doesn't actually talk to much people, actually. She's actually also very picky to who she talks to and spends her time with. And right, there's a lot of that going on, and these are FE DOMs, folks. Like, what we thought of FE people running around talking to everybody, social butterfly, that's not actually
I'm pretty
true.
picky too. I mean, it depends. If an FE person has been very hurt in the emotional environment, then they might not want, like, we're very sensitive to everything that's happening. So like rejection is very sensitive. So like there's a lot of reasons why they wouldn't want to put themselves out there.
Contrast that to FI people we know who automatically make friends within the first 2 seconds of meeting them.
Yeah.
And you're left going, what? Do you even know them? And then we're like, yeah, we like talked about, both of us having terrible childhood traumas. Like, it's just a bonding moment. And
yeah,
I would say from my end, sometimes it's easier. And I know I've heard this from my friend who complains about other FI people in her life. We've all had the same sentiment. Sometimes it's easier to share traumas with people we don't know based on the shared problems than it is sharing it to someone we love. It could actually be really hard for us to even bring that up.
Yeah.
For some reason. Even though obviously that shouldn't be. I guess in my mind I'm thinking that shouldn't be the case, but it does happen. I would say even I myself found myself talking to some people where I would have a brief 5-minute bonding moment where I feel as if my whole life is completely understood. Of course, that's not true. They only understood like a snapshot of my life. But I think I made a thread about this, a personal essay, where I believe that the value of that small 5-minute interaction was only worth it because it was also 5-minute interaction. I actually don't want more and I don't want less. Like, I'm actually happy that became what it was. Before I do want to quickly add, because this is actually part of back to our original point about introversion versus extroversion.
Yeah.
I would say because introversion is the personal universe that we're talking about, I think a withdrawing period, why introverts tend to withdraw, and is because sometimes reality can be deafening, right?
Hmm.
Like we would prefer the silence of our own thoughts or our own feelings
Or
rather.
external reality could even be invalidating to your inner
Absolutely,
universe.
yeah. Because I was just trying to connect the dots with how an FI person would want to withdraw for a second, and I think it's because they kind of got their fill. We don't really we have a finite amount of, at least I describe this as myself, a very fixed amount of what I can give to somebody, and once that
Mm.
reaches a peak, it's very okay. I need to do something about it now because if I don't, I'm just gonna be a robot, and I'm gonna be worse to the person that I like, which feels I would feel way worse to do that to them than I could just say, "Hey, can I see you in the next day for a second because I really need to, process those feelings."
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with the other person. It's actually more so a sign of how I am considerate of them because the minute I go over that peak, it switches from positive and warm to negative and cold. And it was way worse than I would have
Yeah.
wanted it to be.
Just as an example, like you might be more aware of not wanting to feel resentful for people that you love, or like not wanting
Absolutely.
there to be any sort of negative emotion about those people. Where for me, if I'm way more focused on what's happening outside, then things like that can creep in without me noticing nearly as much. Um, yeah, so I feel like we talked a lot about the feeling function, and part of it is because this is definitely an interest of both Nate and mine. Um, this is a very strong interest because I believe that if we can understand how FI and FE interact a little bit more, then that can help with personal and interpersonal healing, like so much more. Like, um, because feelings in general in our culture, I feel like are very just nebulous and misunderstood. I think that, like, I almost want to say that TI and TE understands each other a little bit better than than FI and FE.
I mean, I
Um,
barely see TITE necessarily argue, and if they do argue, it's never as intense and spiteful as feelers do.
and I almost would even say maybe it's because the psyche, our collective psyche, has integrated TI and TE a little bit more. Maybe because, so kind of just a segue. If we're talking about thinking right now, um, thinking is focused on logic and reason, and we have TI that is focused on your inner universe. What is true about you? What are your personal truths? What is the system of you? How does it work? Um, and then extroverted thinking is about all of those facts in the outer universe. Um, what are the systems that we're dealing with? What are the different factors? It's very impersonal. It's very taking the facts at face value. Um, the thing is, so the point wanted to make with that is that our culture already integrates this pretty well. Like, even if you just look at the scientific method, you have to do an experiment, you have to test the cause and effect. What did you get? You have to say that out loud. That is the extroverted thinking. And then you have to, well, actually, before you even do the scientific experiment, you have to look and do a meta analysis. What has everyone else done? What are the missing pieces? What question do you have? What hypothesis do you have? That's the introverted thinking.
Or even what variables did we miss? Or
Yeah.
were there things that we should have considered right before? Like, I remember like
Yeah.
if published articles would come out and TI folks could like rip it to shreds because they're looking at like, well, that doesn't coincide with what you just
Yes.
said, right? Like this sentence doesn't make any sense. Why would you make a claim like that when you know that that's not actually true? So you're only
Yeah.
like using it because the thing is, I think with I remember hearing this quote like statistics doesn't lie, but the narrative behind the statistics could produce right the wrong conclusions. Right? If
Yeah.
your data that you the information that you got those data from, you will present on the graph as incorrect, even though it looks correct.
Yeah.
Right?
So, like, introverted thinking, not only is it kind of required for like the beginning, like before you even do an experiment, but it's also like afterward. Like, what are your takeaways? What's your new opinion? Like, was your hypothesis right or wrong? Like, what is that like? And also like peer reviewing, like having other people check it for like other factors externally. Like you have to be kind of an expert and have your own inner universe that is logical and understands this enough in order to even peer review. Like I might be butchering this a little bit. I'm working
Well, I
on a
can add a nuance.
master's in psychology, but I'm not like a literal scientist, but I do get the scientific method. My point here, and I want to hear your thoughts on it, but I just want to say my point here is that we kind of know that both TE and TI are like necessary. And so even though there are going to be conflicts between TI and TE, I feel like I don't know. There's more of an understanding there. They're more aware of each other.
Well, there's
But
no
what do
there's
you?
no spite. There's no really feely
Yeah,
side to them that
that's
would
so
make them
true.
feel upset, right? Like there wouldn't. Why would they be upset? They're just arguing something that's a fact or something.
Yeah.
I mean, I would add that using FE as what you mentioned before about being comfortable with the changes and the easy shifting
Mm-hmm.
of in situations in real life, that's kind of TE as well. Like I would say as a person, I would say I'm comfortable with studies and reports changing over time
Mm-hmm.
because experiments that have access to now could be more accessible and are made possible that we probably couldn't have done before. Whereas I would say a TI person might be more skeptical of certain new
Mm.
things that pop up. They might be like, well, are you sure you've tested it right? Like, because I remember from the previous thing, this is what went
Mm.
wrong. So if you're going to repeat that to make sure you're right, are you sure when you repeat it, you're actually going to remove the thing that made it wrong? Kind of
That's
thing,
so
right?
true. Like I had to do a paper last semester that was like pick two studies that tested for the same thing and got different results, read them both and figure out what your position is and then argue it. And to me that seems kind of introverted thinking in the sense of that like you have to um find the consistency and the inconsistency and like kind of pick one, right?
Mhm.
But like it seems like extroverted thinking in general. I'm not saying that people won't be able to do that if you're not a TE user. I mean, because clearly TE can do that as well. But I would just say generally, TE can probably hold like seemingly different facts at the same time, but understand the context of both of them.
Well, as long as it works.
Yeah, if it works.
Right?
I think
Maybe
introverted
I'm
people
butchering it because of my
will.
low, because we're both low stack thinkers, but
Yeah.
I think a big part of me is does it really matter necessarily the components, all the cogs in the machine, if it actually gets the job done? But then I can see where, in a TI person's point of view, all the cogs in that machine has to work because if one thing is off, then the whole thing could be wrong. Or you will
Yeah.
come to a mistake later. But then for us as a TE person, I'd be like, well, if there was a mistake, we'll just fix it when it happens. Right?
Yeah.
Instead of
That's
having to, do
exactly.
we have to
Yeah.
take out all the pieces, or can we just wait till it happens? It would be like, okay, well, we'll just remove the piece and put the right one in. And then the TI person's like, well, you could have prevented that if you had just you just read my schematics from previously.
Yeah. So, do you want to just kind of share in your own words what you think the dynamic is between TI and TE? And then we can kind of share examples after.
Like in between, like let's say from the people that we know, type of thing, of how like TE people versus TI folks interact.
Or let me see if I can take a crack at it in the sense that I think I would say that TI is very much like if we want to see how these functions manifest, TI is very focused on their like personal principles or like these underlying foundational principles of why something is true. Whereas, as you were talking earlier, extroverted thinking is more focused on the cause and effect of does it work or does it not? Where introverted thinking is like, well, why does this work and how can we take this principle for like other
Well,
things or
there could be situations where it could make perfect sense in theory, right? Like a lot of typology systems tend to be TI based because of that reason. But then
yeah,
when you really bring it up and you bring it to the tribune of the psychologists and the psychiatrists, we all look at it and
yeah,
go, but can you really repeat it? Like you can't just, it just fits, let's say, your country or your
yeah,
bias or something because where was the output from everybody else,
So
right? Kind of,
yeah,
yeah.
as far as like reaction, I think that TI can see TE as, so yeah, I guess this is kind of what I mean by like how they interact is that TI can see TE as getting rid of its freedom or glossing something over and not being as much of a critical thinker about their own opinions. TI can see TE as like always sourcing from some expert or authority who said something's true and kind of building off of that a little too much, where TI might find that unoriginal. Both TI and FI are might find the extroverted part unoriginal seeming or authority or like, because like FE might be focused on like the social hierarchy or the social influence, but then TE is focused on like, well, a scientist said it, so therefore it's true. And TI is like, well, what motivated the scientist to say that? And you know what I mean?
I mean, I love it because in a way they're both equipped to critique each other. Like, right,
Yeah.
the dynamic of critiquing each other works, and I think that's why communication and holding space for each other is so important. Because a person who just trusts the method, like the scientific method,
Yeah.
without any kind of else other kind of critical thinking involved, might come off wrong, right? It could come off completely
Yeah. And so TE might see TI as a little bit bullheaded or stubborn in what
taking
it
too long to
thinks.
come to a decision.
Yeah, and taking too long. Because okay, actually, that's another thing I was just thinking of, for example, with the scientist thing. Like, sure, like TI can be like, well, why would a scientist say that? Blah blah blah. But like TE might be able to just say, well, if a scientist said it, I believe it because um that's really all you need. You know what I mean? Okay, how do I even explain this?
Well, I was
Sometimes you
thinking
don't
of in
have to
terms,
think about it more.
yeah, like we all, I would say, yeah, sometimes for a TE person, it's always like, do you even need to overthink it necessarily? Is that like those philosophical razors that we talk about, where sometimes you just have to cut
Oh yeah, like
because right,
Occam's
it's taking too
razor.
long? Yeah, like,
Yeah, I was just thinking about how both FE and TE might see the introverted part as doing too much work to
well,
get the
oh,
conclusion.
I just to add nuance to this and add a bone, throw a bone into this.
Mm-hmm.
TI person could be wondering if we're really analyzing, spending so much time on. Well, as a high thinker, TE thinker would probably think is, or probably feel kind of problematic because they're overthinking their feeler function because it's the lower
Mm-hmm.
stack for them. That's where they put all of their time in, right?
Yeah.
Because they want to protect, either they want to protect that baby FI of theirs, or they want to somehow provide for that feeling. And I think it's a similar dynamic with somebody who's a high introverted thinker and say they just want to be, well, accepted for
Mm-hmm.
their ideas, for their
Mm-hmm.
conclusions, but have a hard time picking the right words, or either they spend too much time finding the right words, and then they
Mm-hmm.
lose on, how to communicate their ideas in a way that people can just be like, oh, I mean, we talk to an INTP regularly,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember that her often biggest concern is, was I too mean? Like, was I too
Mm-hmm.
cold? And then I'm always like, you weren't cold enough. If that makes you feel better.
Yeah. And like, so for me, introverted thinking is my inferior function, but it is my preferred thinking function. And I would say that everything that I think, I have to think it from the ground up. I don't ever take any fact at face value. It can make school hard. I like learning and I like doing things that make the teacher happy and make my life better. But as far as like regurgitating a fact just because I heard it and accepting it as true, it's hard for me to learn in that way. I have to interact with it myself, figure out why it's true, or else it just does not really stay put in my brain.
I mean,
Um,
I'll counter that with
yeah.
how my TE is like, sometimes I use my TE in a way where I would present two TI topics to fight amongst each other. And because if I get all the TI people arguing, then I could easily pinpoint which one's the right one, because then I
Yeah.
have all the information on the table. I think it's harder for me to engage with a TI person one on one. This is just personal experience, because they aren't necessarily going to be sharing all of their TI with me.
Oh, like what confuse or what led them to the conclusion?
Yeah, I I need to know well, I also need to know all the parts of that machine. But if it's not delivered in a way that I guess my TE can easily, right, understand
You
it,
know,
it might be hard for me to take it.
I just realized another parallel here. You know how you were saying that you, as an FI user, will share like something super personal to you to someone that understands? Well, I only feel comfortable sharing like why I think what I think to someone that like already thinks it. Like not always. Like I'm trying to push myself.
But you're picky, right, of who,
Yeah.
and it
Because
doesn't always have to be the person you're close to, too.
yeah, it doesn't have to be at all. But the reason is that it is a waste of energy trying to explain to someone that isn't willing to get it. And I think that with the introverted judging functions, it takes a lot of energy to put it out. Like, and it really sucks if it's not worth it when you've dug it up and
I
then
just
it's
thought
not
of
worth it.
how this connects to the languages thing.
Mm.
Imagine, right? Like, let's say we're both English speakers, so it's
Mhm.
fine. But imagine if you were to speak to somebody where English is their second language.
Oh,
Having that barrier is gonna make
that's a
us
really good
frustrated.
metaphor.
And of course, you're not gonna want to talk to this person again, maybe not because you're mean to them, but because you're gonna have to go through that process of explaining the basics of how you think. And it's
Oh,
not worth it. Well, I mean, we feel as if it's not worth it, but even though we know that the person might have nuggets of wisdom, but because of that communication barrier, it's just going to be harder. I think that's where the application of being a good listener comes into play,
mm,
because if you know that the person is using a different set of tools, a different set of jargon, a different set of typology culture when they talk to you, to avoid any kind of frustration is to be familiar with where they're at, and then that person too would do the same for you. That way their
mhm.
frustration could be minimized in a way.
So, yeah, would you say that like if you were to open up about like some sort of deep trauma to someone that you were close with, but you didn't really think that they would get it, but you wanted them to, that it would like be very disappointing if you were to waste your time explaining it and then there like was a reaction where you felt like misunderstood or
Well,
judged.
that it goes back to an ego thing, because was I expecting something out of them?
Mm,
Sometimes if we project an expectation on something, we get disappointed right away because we wanted that validation. So I
mhm,
think it goes back to checking with ourselves and say, okay, you want to tell this person that you love something that's traumatic to you, but you also know, because this is somebody you love, you're quite familiar with their quirks and what they do.
and also
So
it
it
probably
becomes a
would really
dance.
hurt you if you really cared about someone. It would probably hurt you even more if they didn't understand you. You'd almost rather not know.
Oh yeah, I mean, don't we have situations where sometimes it hurts more because it's somebody you love than just anybody? Because if it was just a random person on the internet, does it really bother you? Like, would it really bother you? That person don't know your life, but this person does. Like, this person's been with you. So to
Hmm.
be invalidated by somebody you love, it hurts more, right? Like, to just be real. I would say I've had arguments with my
Hmm.
friends because we would unintentionally hurt each other because we wanted a certain thing to be taken a certain way. And the other person just
Mm.
either wasn't ready at the time, didn't really realize how serious the situation was. Like, that communication portion of that, before the news was said,
Yeah.
wasn't there.
I'm just thinking about how, for my introverted thinking, if somebody doesn't agree with my core principles, I don't really know how to convince or explain for them to agree with the core principles. Like it's so much
Yeah.
easier for me to explain, well, this is how I came to my conclusion.
I mean,
Um,
if I have an archetypal, visceral reaction about a person that I knew doesn't fit what I know as a bad person, I'm just gonna ghost them, right? And they're gonna
yeah.
be right, and they're just gonna think, why is he avoiding me? I'm like, I don't need to explain myself because I already
Oh,
know that person's bad to me, so it's not happening.
oh yeah. Yeah, so like if you think that okay, if you think that someone doesn't have integrity, you aren't gonna like try and tell them like, oh, this is
Like, what
why
it is,
how you
no.
bother me.
I would say the
Yeah.
reason we wouldn't, because well, here's the thing though. Here's the funny part. The upside to that is I could still work with those people. Me choosing to withdraw is to protect me, and my beliefs or my standards or whatever, my universe, my personal universe. However, in the real time, I can still work optimally with them. Like I have that notion of I can save you from a burning building, but I'm not gonna call you tomorrow because
Yeah,
we're not that close.
introverted judging will protect its inner universe from being, I guess, impacted negatively by the external things kind of.
I mean, it goes back to that feeling of it's too much. You know, we already have a fixed amount of what we can bring out to the real world. If explaining is going to take a big portion of that or a big chunk of our energy, we're not going to do it unless the context or the circumstances were just right.
And this is connected to why TI can feel like TE is trying to change its mind and not really
or dismiss its mind.
Yeah. Either like dismissing, like for me, I mean, I'm not a TI dominant person, but it can feel like, are you dismissing my expertise or dismissing my intellect? Do you not realize I thought this through before I came to this decision? And so it can feel, that's where it can feel like TE is trying to manipulate what you're allowed to think, and like it could feel very controlling. And all extroverted judging can maybe feel controlling to the other perspective if it's not holding space. But do you want to talk a little bit about, from the TE perspective, if you put yourself in the TE shoes, what bothers you, or like what are your interactions with TI?
Ooh. I would say, okay, I have periods of my life where I could use that as an example. Before my, let's say,
or like how does your TE view TI?
Yeah, like before my experience with my fellow TI users, where I've actually gotten pretty okay with you guys. Often TI when presented to me, it felt like it had invalidated. I'm gonna use that word because it made sense at the time. It felt like there was an invalidation of identity, which is, I think, is something that's very common amongst a lot of FPs, where when we're faced with TI, it's as if we needed to have a reason to explain how we feel, which is kind of awkward with us because it's one of the things we're most confident in, to present a question on how that it seemed like that our experience is somehow incorrect in some way. We will react to that in a feely way, like in an emotional way. Not realizing that the TI person asking that question is actually not coming from an FI judgment. It's more of an expression of curiosity. Like a TI person asking a question is actually a big move on a TI person's part, because that means that they're interested and that they respect you.
Yes. Yeah. That's a good point in saying that if you have the different axis, a TE person might assume that any sort of introverted judging is coming from a emotional or feely place, which isn't necessarily true. But how would you say, like, to me, like that's kind of how your FI would react to TI, but how does TE see it? Like you mentioned, it can seem like it's slow to make a decision. Maybe it could seem pedantic.
Well, the question that comes up to me, well, pedantic is one of the things that pop up, but another question I come up with is, can I use it? Can I use it now? Because a big sign of if I can use it now means that because I judge how well you've thought about it is if you know it could be applied. And if it couldn't be applied, did you really think it through? That's kind of as my team kind of comes back. Because there's been a lot of situations. Actually, I'm exaggerating. There were some situations where theories pop up and I'll entertain them with my NE. You know, obviously, I would love to hear it. But at the end of the day, if I can't use it, you know, if I don't come home with something in hand that is tangible to my perspective, was it worth it? And I have to weigh those situations in mind. Was it worth it? Because I have to think of it in terms of prioritizing. Was it worth? Because I like to organize my energy. I like to organize my time. I like to organize my perspectives. And if something is going to revolutionize my mind, I will give it my day. You know, I have all the time in the world to have something revolutionize my life. But if it doesn't, then it does give me this sense of disappointment. And I think with TI, that could come up sometimes. I wouldn't say it's often though, because my respect for TI has been quite well, I would say.
And I can even parallel that with like FE is like, okay, so FI, you really care about me, you really love me, but do you show me? Are you there for me? Are you even in my life? What good is it if you're gonna Just have me
Say
in
it
your
and then just
mind.
leave. Yeah.
Like, this has been my problem with, like, INFPs come to mind, of like specific INFPs that I might have been interested in or like dated or had crushes on. It's like they could tell me like, "Oh, you really impacted my life for the better," but it's like we talked, like, how many times have we talked? Like, you're never around.
Well,
Like,
here's the funny part, I would say, to
you know what I
even
mean?
validate that. Sometimes, okay, I would look through, and this is going to be a shallow example, but I would look through TikToks.
Wait.
I would see something that my friend would enjoy, but I will choose not
Mm.
to send it to them because I'm having me time today.
Oh man,
I'm
I
gonna send it
can't not
after.
send it. Every single time it's a reflex. If someone
You
will,
right, you have to send it and be like, but for me, I'm thinking of, if I send it, then I have to have a conversation and then have to explain it, and then we're gonna have a good time. But then right now, I only have 2 minutes. Either I can send it now, or I can do my 1 hour of busy time, me time, and then I can send it after. That
that's
can give
like
you that 20 minutes.
one of the easiest way to stay connected with people is whenever you see something that makes you think of them is to just tell them.
Well, I save it for later.
Oh,
There's
okay.
the
Well, see, I
FI
would never,
thing,
I
right?
would never
I
remember.
would save it.
And see, I
So
guess I want to just preface that it's not that it doesn't mean a lot to me if an FI user says that. I'm not trying to act like FE is just shitting on that. And it's not like FI doesn't mean a lot to me as
no, but we
well.
are describing how, right? We come, like,
But
these are examples of how.
you can, I think extroverted judging can feel just kind of teased of like, okay, so you say that. I can even tell that you feel that, but there's nothing.
Oh,
No,
and
for
then the
FE.
vomit,
Oh wait,
right? Like
what?
the FI vomit, like 1 week later, where you get this long essay.
Oh
I'm
my
like,
god.
oh, I love you. And you're going, wait, you didn't give me anything for last week. And then you come to me with this 3,000 word essay.
But like for the FE and FI perspective, it's like you feel that it does mean something to me, but there's no trust there, there's no comfort there, there's ultimately no love there.
Well, there wasn't a consideration for your feelings.
Yeah,
I
but
think
there's
that was,
also
I think there's a big
there's
part there,
not a
because,
bond.
no,
They
because we're
have,
expressing how I feel, right?
yeah, and I guess like
Mm-hmm.
the point I want to even make have FI feel or get even more is that ultimately no bond was created and could not be created unless we were able to use this. And with TE and TI, it's like that's a great theory, but if you cannot connect it to TE to apply it, then it is just a theory. Is it going to change anyone's lives or improve the way we do things? Probably not if it can't get to that threshold. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Yup,
I
yup,
think that
yup.
there's like this threshold with extroversion, extroverted judging, to where it's not like we're trying to just shit on you, introverted judging. You know what I mean? It's like TE. Would you say from the TE perspective, it's like, please give me something I could use. I would love to. Tell me more. But you aren't doing
No.
it. And it's like, okay.
Absolutely. My biggest complaint with, and my best friends right now are two TI users, one inferior and one auxiliary, and it's always a matter of, if I tell them something, I won't hear the result till like a month later. So it's
Hmm.
really hard for, I would say it gives me a measure of anxious thoughts, because I don't know if it worked. And then I feel responsible if something didn't work out, because I would feel like, if you had told me what was wrong with it, I could have added a fix. I could have given you a fix. But because you're not telling me what the thing, I can't help you. So it's really hard for me if I'm missing certain data. But then these people do not have my function. So with a TI person, they will come to that conclusion. They're equipped
Yeah.
already with the principles in mind. They're fully independent to handle the situation. I just have to trust them to handle that
Mm.
situation. I mean, especially with my
Yeah.
friend, he's an ESTP, SE dom, right? He can handle it.
Mhm.
But I get
Yeah.
worried sometimes, because there are situations where I feel as though I could have offered a more efficient option, but because I'm not present all the time in that person's life, it's hard for me to even give them that. And I
Hmm.
would say, right, like, I would say, even if we were going to switch the roles to an FE person to an FI person, for you, it would be like, well, if you had a problem with your emotions, if you had just told me, I could have given you the input that you needed to fix it, and we would hung out the
Yeah.
next
And
day.
sometimes FI can just assume some of the input, and TI can kind of assume as well. Like anyone can assume, but what I'm talking about with the introverted judging is that it's so in their inner universe that they might not. I don't know, they might not be able to know. And actually, Carl Jung talks about how introversion projects. Like we all project, yes, but the concept of projection, where you're putting your subjective onto the objective, is kind of what introversion does, where introjection is what extroversion does, where it assumes that the external is them. So two different things, but like, so yeah, wait, what was I really saying?
Well, we're putting a translation of what our internal thing feels about the world rather than what the world actually is, right?
Yes.
So there's going to be moments where an FI person might assume that you're just telling me this because of what I think you're feeling. But the thing is all I know is what I'm feeling. I actually don't know what you're feeling. The best way to figure out is ask. But sometimes in the social realm, it may be awkward to ask. Like right? Like, it may be awkward for me to come up and be like, say, how are you feeling? That sounds like a lot of energy for me to say. Whereas that could cost you 0.5% of a day. Like, it has nothing, really.
But then I don't even know how to enter a conversation without, like, asking that sometimes.
Yeah, how? Whereas if you were to ask me, or if I were to ask you, like, what are you thinking? You know, what are your theories of the day? It may come up a little bit harder.
You know,
to, like, write it out for me.
My partner's an INFJ, and I'm just thinking about, since INFJs also prefer extroverted feeling, I'm thinking about how many times in a day do we stop to check in with how is your day going? Probably like at least a dozen. And that's just a thing of like today.
A dozen? Wait, seriously, a dozen? That's a lot.
Yeah, maybe more than that.
Mine is twice a day.
And like, this is someone who,
and I live with my parents. It's twice a day, right? Like, I drop them off at work in the morning. We chat for maybe 15 minutes, and then we do it again for 30 driving back home. And then we're done.
It's how we connect, in the sense of like, we wake up, it's like, did you get good sleep? Like, are you feeling like fresh and ready to start the day, or are you feeling like, you know, dreading work today? You know what I mean?
I mean, I schedule a 2-hour conversation with them maybe once or twice a week, aside from that twice a day situation, so that we want to make sure everything's all taken care of. And then with my friends,
that's a lot of energy. Sometimes
I would schedule a day with my, like, especially with my ESFJ friend, I would schedule, let's say, an entire day where we could just talk for maybe 8 hours. And it's something for a fill, but then it's like, to me, it's exhausting. I have to fit it somehow, because if I don't, I'm just gonna spend the rest of my week thinking about it, and then I'm just gonna go to sleep.
You're making me realize how much me and my INFJ will check the pulse emotionally like a dozen times, but then like we don't have time for a full conversation. Like, we're both in the middle of a work day.
See, this is why I prefer lower stack FE sometimes, because with low stack FE, I don't have to deal with that checking in. The ESTP friend of mine, we don't even talk weekly. It'll just be a random text of, hey, can you send me money? I'll be like, sure. It's no big deal. Or like, hey, what do you think of this? It'd be like, oh, that's great. Done. But
for me, it's sort of like, are you feeling productive today? Or like, and especially, I mean, I probably ask that more because I'm with another FE user, because I know for the INFJ that it can be helpful or beneficial to draw them out with they might not volunteer it, but it's good for them.
Yeah.
You know. But anyway, so that was the judging functions. We talked a lot about that, and